Check engine light on? Take the guesswork out of your check engine light with O'Reilly Veriscan. It's free. Ask for O'Reilly Veriscan today.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Ben Goessling in about 30 minutes and Lavelle from spring training. We're not that far off from the regular season opener, are we? Is it late March, early April? I never know.
It's usually late March, like that last Thursday, Friday, whenever it is. For everybody that has their Wobble Bingo cards out, too, by the way.
Yes.
He told me today he will be en route from Port Charlotte back to Fort Myers.
Okay, that could be.
So he'll be on the road somehow, somewhere doing
in a convertible?
something.
Does he have a convertible this year?
Well, remember a couple of years ago he had the car that rumbled.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Well, there was a car behind you, or it had a sensor.
There was some sensor that he couldn't figure out how to disarm it.
The rumble seat he couldn't figure out in his SUV.
That's true.
You never know is the point. So I'm looking forward about 90 minutes from now.
Solon Blaine, hands down the best and my favorite GM of the 4 local teams, and I'm not even a hockey guy. I love his no BS mentality and the fact that good or bad he comes on your show and answers the questions and owns how he and the team is doing. Love his honesty. 612 Denver guys, much as we want more players in a blockbuster, I respect to Bill for not wavering from his plan. He knows the buyouts will give us plenty of money to adjust and restructure. This team may be overperforming, but we should be happy. We will only get better with more money to spend on rounding the edges of the roster. On the other hand, Brandon from New Mexico, Guerin simply copped out. We all know 97 is not returning before the playoffs. He could have placed him on the LTIR and gotten salary cap relief, but he didn't want to upset Kaprizov. This will go down as the most bonehead decision in Wild history, especially for a team that hasn't been past the first round in 9 damn years. I missed the first half of the Billy G interview. Did he provide any answers to the severity of the Kaprizov injury? No, he's not giving any details on the injury other than he doubled down on the belief that all 3 players are going to return.
That's what he thinks.
Before the end of the regular season. Now, in one or more of these cases, that might mean 2 games. I'm guessing in Kaprizov's case, it might not mean a bunch of games, but we'll have to see. He's not giving up any optimism about the rest of the season. Unfortunate. This team won't get out of the first round with even everyone healthy. Guerin refuses to do his job and improve the team. Instead, he makes one of the smallest, softest, slowest teams even slower and less skilled. It's a disgrace to the state of hockey. There you get, I think,
the cross-section.
The range. I'm not sure what I was expecting him to say, but he sounded defeated today and didn't seem all that confident even in his own choices. Covers it by saying, I know stuff others don't. Maybe true, he will be judged on decisions like today. Well, the bottom line on that answer is he is in effect saying, we don't covet Hustadinov. Am I pronouncing that right? Hustadinov. That's in effect, he said, I don't want to go down the road of disparaging a player, but that's who we're talking about here. That's who, the quote, the comment that I was quoting from Russo, that's who they're talking about. And what is he, 22? He's young. So in effect, what he is saying is, we've given up on him. We don't think there's that much there. Now, if he's right, he's vindicated probably almost no matter what happens with the other parts of the deal. Because I think we gave up a 6 also in that trade. But if he's wrong, and you end up getting a guy who elsewhere ends up being a damn good player, then yeah, that'll be part of the story at that point. What I think he was trying to say is part of what we have to do is harshly evaluate even the players we've drafted and signed, and then make decisions at that point. And you can double down on, be stubborn about the fact that we got them, and so we're not going to give up on them, because that's a sign of failure, right? It's a sign of it can be an acknowledgement of, well, we didn't do our due diligence in the first place. He's not that good. Or it can be, we can't compound the mistake. If we don't see anything there or not enough there, and our projections aren't very favorable to a player who really hasn't been very good offensively to this point, then we will use him in part of a deal. Now, on what was the pronunciation again on Brazo? The assumption is that he's a rental, And that's part of the reason you don't even give up what you gave up for essentially a month and a half. And he says, don't assume anything, including that there's no possibility that he might not be brought back. I assume he could be brought back. What will he have to do? I mean, the other thing about him, again, is he's had moments, but lately none. And you could say the same thing about Nyquist, right? I mean, he's had moments, especially with us, but lately had been awful. So what you're banking on, again, is fresh, another chance, new scenery, new team, new lease on life, and the idea that, we can get better by grades, that not massively better, but subtly better in both cases. That these are, and now on Brazo, that's the trade-off. It's because half the time we hear we're too slow, and half the time we hear we're not big enough. He's big. He's enormous. He's like 6'5", and some of the hockey people who like him believe that he compensates for some of the slowness in other ways that make him effective. In the end, I think in any sport, you tend to grade, I think, on effectiveness, regardless of what the measurables might be. But realistically, given both of these players and their most recent history, are you looking at breakthrough guys? No. But I don't even think he would disagree with that. He's not pretending that they're worthy of that. The debate question is always, is it worth giving up anything if this is the most you can move the needle? Are you just going back to having, that was my point on the Russian, giving up the Russian, not that he's great, but that he might be a chip. Now, in a later trade, because Guerin keeps giving the impression, I want to be able to have flexibility when I really feel like we've got salary cap flexibility in this offseason. But part of his comeback to that was, well, only I know really what kind of value this player has. And in effect, what he was saying is he doesn't have that much value. So he's not going to necessarily be a chip in a larger trade. In a more ambitious trade, he's only likely to be a piece we can use in a smaller trade, a more modest trade. And he also acknowledged several other teams have been made far more significant moves. He's serene about that, I think, whether he should be or not, because he's saying we couldn't make those kinds of moves right now.
Yeah.
Which may well be true. But I understand to a certain extent if you're a Wild fan going, I just feel like we're always waiting and waiting and waiting and biding our time. And you want to, even if you know logically that there's only so much they can do, you want to think, well, maybe he can pull a rabbit out of his hat, right? That's what you're hoping for, something dramatic. We talked extensively yesterday with Russo about the question of whether the Wild are prisoners on Kaprizov to what Kaprizov wants. And I probably should have asked Guerin the same question I asked Russo regarding the possibility that the Wild are afraid to shut him down because they think that would annoy the player. But in this case, Russo thought it was the opposite because he thinks the agent, including who they ended up using as a doctor for the surgery in this case, they've been more in charge of it. And he thinks there's a belief within the player, or at least his agent, that they want to be as deliberate as possible in this case, which would indicate not necessarily that there's much anger or trepidation that if we shut him down for the regular season for the purposes of maybe then opening the door to another bigger deal, that we're running the risk of alienating a player that we can't afford to alienate. So we'll see. It might be still worthy of a conversation at a later date with him. We're back in action tonight, right?
Vancouver.
That's Vancouver. Yeah, Louis is there, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Right here on
Do
the
you
fan.
think Louis suffered any FOMO last night? Edina goes into OT and ultimately wins. Do you think
he even knew it was on? I don't even think he knew the tournament was on.
He knew. He's acting like he's moved past it. And in some ways, I think he has. But I got to think, when he saw his overtime, Edina, there was a little bit. There had to be a little something in his gut.
I was bummed. I think what happened last night actually probably emboldened him that he made the right decision because it's the last game of the night.
Yes, he does.
It'd been a clean sheet the whole day, no overtime. There was one. St. Thomas Shakopee was about 2 inches from maybe going overtime in the third period.
Correct.
Shakopee hit the post late in the third. But I was hoping for no overtimes this whole tournament. as you may remember from Tuesday, just because nothing bothered Louis.
Yes.
More, they don't pay me anymore for overtime. Nothing bothered him more than when it went OT. So when it was the last game last night, I felt like that was the hockey gods giving Louis a little stick tap and saying, we got you, Luigi. We're going to send it into OT for Mark Parrish this time around, and you enjoy the West Coast.
We will switch to some football conversation. Free agency now early next week, right? Right around the corner. And we don't have to just make it about the quarterback position. We can make it about other possibilities for your Minnesota Vikings, including shoring up the interior part of their offensive line, maybe a couple of defensive linemen we should be talking about. All of that will be discussed with Ben Goessling in about 15 minutes.
At Arizona State University, we've made online education better, smarter, and more personalized so you can go further in your aspiring field.
I decided to pursue medicine once I realized that ASU did have the online program for biological sciences. You're still required to learn the same curriculum. You're still being tested on the same content that anyone would be tested on in person. The comprehensiveness of the program prepared me so well for medical school.
Explore over 300 programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
Are the Wolves in Miami tonight?
Yes, sir.
That'll be on the Timberwolves channel, I'm assuming?
Of your iHeartRadio app. Very easy to make it a preset.
So many options, see? You get the iHeartMedia app, it's free. iHeartRadio app, I should say. It's free. And you can do presets, just like you do on your own back in the day on the radio dial. So if you want to go back and forth between, for example, wild hockey or on the fan or high school hockey, AA quarterfinals tonight, or the Wolves, you just keep pressing the buttons on your iHeart Media app. It's a beautiful thing. The presets, you can set up the presets, right? KFAN Plus, Timberwolves channel, and then all three, you're just going back and forth as often as you need to. The signal is pristine. You don't have to worry about where you are, like in the old days where the frequency might not have the power you're looking for. It's all online. It's all, if you're in your car, obviously connected to your Bluetooth in your car, and it's that simple, and it's free.
My presets right now.
Do we get anything for that?
Do we get anything for
that? For that cell job? I thought I was pretty effective there.
We'll get like an email from one of the corporate bosses with like a virtual high five.
Yeah.
We get those every once in a while.
Right.
My presets, KFAN Plus, Timberwolves channel.
News Talk 1130.
I don't have that.
Well, you should, because sometimes we have sports there.
That's true.
I think we got the Gophers there tonight. Don't we have Gopher hockey there tonight?
Are the Gophers playing Notre Dame tonight?
I can't remember.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
It's another example.
I could throw that in there. Sure. I have Shabuzi radio for one of the presets.
Who?
Shabuzi.
Is that like a?
It's a singer.
Oh, that's the name of somebody. That's not like, I thought maybe that was like a musical genre.
No.
Oh.
No. Well, in some ways he is.
Okay.
He's his own genre.
Shabuzi.
I've got more room. And you can have it looks like unlimited presets.
The beauty of it.
People should maybe suggest presets for us to the Bradshaw and Brian KFAN text line 64686.
Not a bad idea.
What else we should add?
Yeah, that's not a bad
But it's super easy. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah, no question. So tonight's one of those trap games, I'm assuming, because Miami has had a very disappointing season. Since Buckets left, they've struggled, even though it was a mess, and they basically, Pat Riley had to finally cry uncle and give him what Buckets wanted, as sad as that is, as bad a statement as that is. But will you double-check the Heat record? Because I don't think they're very viable.
They're not very viable, but they are kind of in a similar position as the Timberwolves. Technically, they're in the same position in that they're both in the 7th spot in their respective conferences.
Oh, they're higher than I thought then.
Yeah, they are. Now, they're like percentage points away from being out into the 10, basically, because they're tied with Atlanta and Orlando. But their record is 29-32.
Okay.
29-32.
Yeah, I don't even know who they use anymore. But this ain't going to be, I don't think, like playing Carolina, playing Charlotte.
No, they've still got Bam, they've got Hero,
and it's still Heat culture. You know, they don't handle very well the tanking concept, and they certainly don't handle very well the idea that we just don't show up on a Friday night. Doesn't mean they're unbeatable by any means, but this is the better test of whether the Wolves are starting to figure some things out about not playing down to the level of competition.
You know who they play a little bit?
Who?
Well, he's been playing pretty well for them is Wig. Andrew Wiggins.
Oh, that's right. I forgot they got Wig.
Now, he's listed, and they have Slow-Mo. He's listed as questionable for the game against the Timberwolves. But it has nothing
to do... Oh, no.
Well, it's true.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
Right.
In this case, he does have an ankle injury that he's dealing with.
Okay. Yeah, they're kind of stuck. I don't know where they go from here. They seem like they're sort of stuck in the middle. Got to be depressing knowing that Buckets is playing as well as he's playing. I have to tell you, and I'm just, it's stating the obvious, and it has been stated before, but it's unavoidable. If you stayed up to watch any or all of the second game of the TNT doubleheader, you just shake your head. It was Lakers hosting the Knicks. A terrific ball game that went into overtime. The Knicks were largely in control, up 5-10 through much of the second half. Lakers make a late run. They send it into OT. The Knicks' best scorer, what's his name? Brunson got hurt. He turned his ankle, and then was unavailable in the OT. And the Lakers win it. And Luka was absurd when he needed to be. Look at the Luka line. It's. I think it ended up with 29. He had a 5-point stretch in which it was almost Gobert-like in his taunting of in this case, former Wolves big man, because Towns unfortunately got caught on a couple of switches. On first a 2 and then a 3. And Luka does, after sinking those shots, what he does. He did what he does, which is, I'm going to take it all out on you, even though it's not really your fault. And he and LeBron worked it was a symphony how well they worked together again yesterday. And, Charles Barkley gets a lot of heat about, he doesn't really watch the games and it's all entertainment. Charles Barkley nailed it again last night on his analysis regarding the Knicks offense. And they got one problem, I think, that's going to hurt them potentially in the postseason if they don't do a better job of dealing with it, is it's too much Brunson. It's all Brunson all the time, and he's a great clutch scorer. He is as crafty and resourceful a little man as I can remember since Tiny Archibald. He really is. But just to have Cat out there doing nothing makes no sense because Cat's got some skill. Now, they did a good job on him defensively, but that was the difference between as much as the Lakers, you review, Luka's got the ball in his hands too much, or LeBron does, the ball moved. Their offense, if they don't go anywhere in the postseason, it'll still be because of their defense. Even though it's played really well, it'll mainly be because of their defense. Their offense is going to be fine because they've got two guys who can score and move the ball and have vision and can get it to the right place. And ultimately, the Lakers, I thought the Lakers offense was more versatile, and the Knicks is so much based on dribble by Jalen, trying to get in the in those cracks in the defense, trying to get off a shot, occasionally passing, but very rarely. I don't think Towns took a shot. I'm not sure if he took a shot in the fourth quarter or OT. I mean, that's not right.
He finished with 12 points, 14 rebounds, 3 of 13 shooting.
To their defense, I mean, he did not shoot very well. 3 for 13 is not very good. I'm sure Day probably cheap shot at him for that too. But in any case, it was it's ongoing every game. You just shake your head about the fact that the Mavericks gave up on this guy.
I saw Johnny's tweet this morning that just said worst trade in NBA history. This is going to sound stupid and childish. The Lakers playing so well, it's angered me to I love watching the NBA. It's taken away my enjoyment from watching NBA games. Well, because it's so frustrating that the Lakers just got gift wrapped this dude and can just move on with the rest of their lives, literally being a 2 seed right now. And his line you asked for, 32 points, 12 assists, and 7 rebounds. And he had a couple of key steals too. He's not a great defender
4 for the night. Okay, there you go. But they were clutch. They were big plays. And you could, it's funny because with the Lakers fans, they're hard to root for all the obvious reasons. But you know what you could see in their faces? Exactly what you're talking about. They're looking around like going, is this happening? Is that Luka Doncic playing for us, wheeling and dealing to LeBron James, who suddenly looks like he's 25 instead of 40? Am I living in La La Land? Well, I guess I am, but I feel like it's a fantasy. You could see it in their joy. They're going, we've got 10 more years of this, unless too much hookah, I guess, and gains 42 pounds.
I don't think he will.
But I think he's got every reason to be energized.
I think he's on the Palenka diet now.
He's got to be at this point. Maybe he'd probably fit in that jacket.
Well, and JJ Redick, he keeps himself in shape.
Yes, he does.
So those 3 guys.
He's coaching his ass off, too.
I try to tell you.
Is coaching his buttocks off.
That is the one thing I like. I like JJ. You know that. I've always liked JJ. And so I'm cool with that, but the Luka thing just pisses me off, man. It just makes me so mad.
The level of skill is almost renders the concerns about defense or other things moot. When you're that skilled offensively and can do that many things, and now on top of it, you got a chip on your shoulder. You kidding me? Wilt Chamberlain, we just celebrated, I think, the anniversary of his 100-point game. Don't rule out the possibility of Luka going back to Dallas and matching the Wilt Chamberlain record of 100 points.
I was thinking the next time he played Gobert, but Dallas is the right answer. Dallas is definitely the right answer.
We'll come back and talk some football. Ben Goessling, where are the Vikings headed in free agency? That's coming up next week. We'll find out. We'll get an early sneak preview with Goessling. Questions for Ben Goessling brought to you by Standard Heating and Air Conditioning. 64686 is the Bradshaw and Bryant KFAN text line, as perhaps by now almost all of you know. And the questions do not have to be Sam Darnold related. I'm sure we'll cover some of that. But I want to start branching out elsewhere as Goessling joins us via the Connecticut Water Systems hotline. You and the Star Tribune, along with your colleagues, have offered up both on the offensive side and defensive side some ideas ahead of free agency. Give us, or give the listeners who've not seen the piece, your suggestion, your idea as it pertains to the offensive side of the equation.
Yeah, so we basically each picked one free agent to say this is the player we think the Vikings should sign, if nothing else. So Mark Gregg, Andrew Kramer, Emily Leiker, and myself all picked one. And my pick for the Vikings was Will Fries, the guard from the Colts. They obviously are looking to make upgrades at that spot. I think they will look for one, maybe two, at either of those spots, and I think he would be a good fit. He's 6'6". He brings a little more of a bully mentality, I think, to that position, which they probably need. He's better in pass protection than a lot of the guys that they've had. And I think would be a noticeable upgrade over what they put at that position. So he was my pick for that spot. I think they'll look at a lot of things. I think he'll have a market. He's coming off of a foot injury this year, but I think if they feel good about him, I think they'll certainly be involved and competitive for him.
Did the Bears beat us to the punch in that regard, in that they've added already 2 interior offensive linemen, and they didn't wait for free agency. They did it via trade, including getting a Pro Bowl All-Pro, if I'm not mistaken, from the Kansas City Chiefs. Do we give the Bears some credit there? Would we have been better maybe trying to steal one of those via trade, or what do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, they certainly made a move, and everybody kind of figured they would be involved in a lot of those same players. I mean, they had the same needs that the Vikings do, and probably were going to be competitive for a lot of the same players. The difference with them is they're sitting a little bit better draft pick-wise than the Vikings are. They only have the 3 at the moment. They should get a 4th pick, the third-round comp pick for Kirk Cousins eventually, but the Vikings don't have a lot of resources to make trades there, so you'd have to get creative. I think you'd have to go into, probably 2026 draft picks or that kind of a thing. But yeah, it certainly was, I think, a sharp move by the Bears to say, let's get this done before the free agency market starts, because there are enough teams, the Vikings included, that have money to spend that may drive prices up. So their ability to solve some of those things with trades including Joe Thuney, I think is a smart move on their part.
So we expect, pretty quick movement? Or is it more likely that we would be involved in the second wave, perhaps? What do we expect early next week once free agency hits?
Well, I would expect them to be more active, and they were active early last year. They signed a lot of those, the Grenard, Van Ginkel, Blake Cashman group, I think was day one, if I'm not mistaken. I think they made a number of those moves for defensive players before Cousins signed or agreed to his deal with the Falcons. That kind of told you they are planning to move on from Cousins because they're spending that money elsewhere. So I would expect they're going to be pretty active early because they have a lot of needs. They have money to spend. I think they're like 6th or 7th in the league in terms of the amount of cap space they have available. And they are, I think, going to be in a position to make some things happen a little bit earlier. That doesn't mean they're going to bid top dollar for every top of the market guy, but I'm sure, especially in a lot of the places where they have defensive needs, they have identified things. I would expect they will move on those things relatively soon. I would think it'll be a busy legal tampering period for them as we head into that official start of free agency on Wednesday.
Do you have any, can you advance your thoughts or even your reporting as it pertains to the Darnold story, which to a certain extent, I think maybe we're all even almost kind of sick of at this point. We want to just see some resolution, one way or the other. You feel any differently than a week ago? Because obviously they didn't franchise him. But along with that, there seemed to be a lot of reporting indicating that they want to keep the door open to perhaps bring him back, which I'm not necessarily offended by, although a lot of Vikings fans, I think, are. And you could say it is a little bit of trying to, it's almost like hedging your bets and playing it both ways. What does your sense, what do your instincts tell you about where that story, how it's ultimately going to be resolved?
Yeah, I mean, the conversations I've had with people involved in the discussions or people that are kind of apprised of what's happening, I think they are certainly looking at possibilities to bring Sam Darnold back. I tweeted something to that effect the other day, and I heard from a lot of the J.J. McCarthy fan club on it. I don't think they are going to go spend $35-40 million a year on Sam Darnold. If the market turns out to be soft for Darnold, and I have heard some people that think it could be because people may think, well, this was a Kevin O'Connell creation. We're not sure if he's going to do this again, apart from this system, apart from these weapons. We don't want to pay for him. If that were the case, and they could say, let's get him back here for, call it $50 million over 2 years, and you do a lot of guarantees up front, and then you kind of leave that second year open-ended, I think they'd look at that, and I don't think it's unreasonable to do that because you haven't seen McCarthy play. You haven't seen enough work to know what he's going to pick up. Everything they saw last year was good. Everything that they saw up to that injury was optimistic, and everything they have heard about him in recovery, I think, has been optimistic as well. But I don't know that you would go into a season coming off of a 14-win year and really still in a position where you want to capitalize on these years without, having some way to go in the event that McCarthy either has a setback or doesn't look like he's quite ready. Because the other thing to remember here is they have been very careful, and they were very careful last year about wanting to control the timeline on McCarthy as much as they possibly could. They did not want something where they had to put him in because of injuries or there was pressure to play him because the team needed him to go in there and he was the best option they had available. It was this discussion of when he's ready by our standards, we're going to give him the job and then he's going to take it and run. Until then, we want to have alternatives. So I think that's still very much going to be the case. And if they could get Darnold on a reasonable deal that doesn't keep them from spending their money to improve the team elsewhere, I don't know why they wouldn't look at doing that. I don't know how realistic that is. I mean, it only takes one team outside of here to pay for him, but I think they are still very much looking at those possibilities. And it tracks pretty closely, I think, with how they played it with Cousins last year, where they kind of had a line and they had a price. And if he did better than that, more power to him. But if he wants to come back, I think there's still a door open for that to happen.
I want to get your reaction to comments that Florio made on consecutive days locally here with PA. And then I think the next day, similar comments on the national show, the Dan Patrick Show. And he threw out some belief that that around the league, the perception on the Vikings regarding Darnold is that they're not sure who's in charge of ultimately making the decision on whether the Vikings really are trying to bring him back or not. He didn't really get specific beyond that. He didn't really say, well, who's on what side, but he gave the indication that almost like there's this open question around the league about who's actually going to make this call. Is there any reason from your perspective to believe that in the front office and or the head coaching office that there's disagreement necessarily on the best approach with Darnold, or what did you make of that if you heard anything about it?
Yeah, I saw it. I read it. I understand where the speculation is coming from in a lot of ways because Kevin O'Connell has a contract extension. Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah doesn't. And I think there's a little bit of intrigue, I suppose, around the league. I mean, you kind of have a lot of people watching the Vikings and saying, well, what are they doing up there in Minnesota? Like, what's the approach? Just having a general manager that doesn't come from the kind of quote-unquote football guy background, I think leads to a lot of chatter about him league-wide. I mean, you certainly hear that in people you talk to. I don't think it's something where the Vikings are out of agreement on this. I think it's a lot of it is people kind of watching what's going on around the league and kind of making conclusions or speculating a little bit about where this thing is going. I don't really think there's anything that I've heard to make me believe that there's a disagreement or there's any kind of friction about things. I think it's a lot of it is, this time of year, people kind of look at different situations and kind of add two and two together and make kind of assumptions about where things are at. I don't really think all of that stuff is based on things they've heard directly from the Vikings. I think a lot of it is educated guesses, and that's fine. That's part of the game this time of year, but I don't really get the sense that there's a lot of disagreement on the process. I think it's kind of this measured approach to Darnold, and they're not in one way or the other necessarily. They're not saying we're out on him or we're going to give him all sorts of money, but it is very consistent with the way they played a lot of these things in the past, and I think that's very much the way they are heading into this one with Darnold as well.
I've got a couple texts I want to run by you, but first, the Vikings do give Theo Jackson a 2-year contract extension. Do we assume that, I think it's a $12.5 million extension, do we assume from that our days putting Cam Bynum on weekly are probably over, or how do we interpret that move?
Well, my understanding of that deal is, once we see the official terms, I think we're going to have a little bit different perception of it. It's basically a 3-year deal, and I don't think you give a guy a 3-year deal without planning for him to be fairly involved in the secondary. But I don't know that it rules out the possibility of Bynum coming back, because I think their preference would still be to use Josh Metellus in kind of this rover role that they've had him in, where he's a linebacker sometimes and he can be a pass rusher. I don't know that you want to say, okay, we're playing 2 deep safeties, Josh and Theo, you each split up the halves of the field, and that's the way we're going to go. I think they would like to have other options there. They certainly like Theo Jackson, and they've had a lot of strong impressions of him from the last couple of training camps because he's made a lot of plays, and when he's gotten on the field, like that pick in Seattle in the game, he has done it there as well. So I think he's going to be involved, but I think they still have another need there. Because the other piece of this is Harrison Smith. Yeah. Is he going to be back? Is something going to get figured out with his contract? Because there is a little bit of work that has to be done there. I think there's still an avenue where Bynum comes back, but I do think Jackson will be involved in things. I don't know that the money precludes them from getting something done with somebody else, and especially with that Metellus role, I think there could still be an avenue where they bring one of those other guys back and try to figure it out with Jackson and whoever the other one is your deep safeties, and Metellus kind of playing that role that he's played.
Guessling, brought to you by Standard Heating and Air Conditioning. Neil writes, what reaction should a fan have, or what should a fan understand when we see trades such as Christian Kirk to the Texans for a 7 or some other well-known player for a 4? For me, I'm quick to question why wouldn't the Vikings give up a 7th-round pick for a Christian Kirk? What do you think?
Well, I think there's certainly a need there. I mean, if you're talking specifically about the wide receiver depth, I think there is a need. I mean, I think that's a position that they're going to look at addressing, and I see the reason to do that, especially when you're probably, well, there's still at least a possibility that Jordan Addison is going to have a suspension for the first 3 games of 2025. So I think they are going to have to consider some of those things. In terms of why they don't do it, I mean, there's a lot of things that you have to figure out there. Does he fit in the scheme? Does he fit in a role that they would like? Does he do everything that they're hoping a receiver would do? And that does include blocking in the run game. I mean, that is something they want their receivers to do. It's something that they want their receivers to do well. It's one of the things that you hear Kevin O'Connell and Wes Phillips talk a lot about in terms of that Rams scheme that worked so well for them when Kevin O'Connell was the offensive coordinator and they won a Super Bowl. Their receivers, Cooper Kupp especially, were involved in that kind of the game, or that part of the game. Does Christian Kirk or any of these other players fit in that regard? So there's a lot of layers to these things, and I think that goes into a lot of the decisions that get made because it has to be a fit from scheme, it has to be a fit from the role, and I think it has to be a fit in terms of what you give up, both with the player's contract and the compensation. So a lot of those things go into it, and not having seen their specific discussions about him, it's hard to say exactly, but I do think there are enough of those calculations that it's not as simple as just, well, why didn't they make that same trade? There's more that gets factored in than just those things.
If we go back to the beginning of this discussion and you throwing out the possibility of an interior offensive lineman from the Colts that the Vikings might, perhaps should be interested in, it is worth reminding people that, was it right after the game, after the playoff loss, or was it the next day? The head coach was as frontal and obvious as he's ever been, right? Basically saying, more than anything else, I'm going to be looking at the interior of our offensive line, right? I mean, that was, so I guess I, like you, would be surprised if one way or the other, or maybe both ways, draft and free agency, that I'll be stunned if they don't make some changes in terms of the personnel. Now, there's no guarantee that the changes are going to work, but I look back on that and I say, well, that in itself should have told us. I mean, they pretty much kind of, I think, signaled how important that was. And so I think fans would have a right to be disappointed if we don't at least see the possibility of some other bodies in the interior part of the offensive line.
Yeah, no doubt. And it was right after the game. It was, he comes into the post-game press conference, pretty emotional with a team that had won 14 games and now it's over. A team that was 8 days ago playing for home field advantage and now it's over. And you lose a game where you take 9 sacks. And I think that was telling. I also have heard enough prior to that made me think this was on their radar. I would be very, very surprised if we are not looking at an offensive line that's got at least 1, maybe 2 different guards. And one of those could be in the draft, but I would not be surprised if they make a couple of moves in free agency or, different avenues to get veteran players in here, because I think they have identified it as a need. It's been a need for a while. I mean, we've talked about it. I think Andrew Kramer and I were going through it on the podcast this week of all of the different guard combinations we have covered in our decade plus for each of us on the beat. And it's a lot. I mean, Brian O'Neill, I think, has played next to like 7 or 8 different right guards in his 8 years with the Vikings. So it's been a long-standing need. I think the head coach is aware of it. I think the front office is aware of it, and I expect it will get addressed. And, again, is it the guy at the top of the market? We'll have to see. I mean, Trey Smith was probably the obvious name, and he got franchise tagged. I don't think that's going to happen at this point. But I very much think it's a high priority for them. I think they've been looking at doing it for a while, and I expect it will be something they're fairly active in this week.
Let me get to a couple of texts for you as we wrap things up. Top 5 at 5 yet to come. And some breaking news on the Gene Hackman story, by the way, that is getting a lot of people's attention as well. Does Goessling not realize we have McCarthy on a rookie deal? I get 3 of these a day that if you entertain even the possibility of bringing Darnold back on what would be clearly a reduced price from what he would be on the open market, people seem to lose their minds on this. That the idea that you are eliminating any hope to sign anybody else if you bring Darnold back at almost any price, I guess I don't get. I assume, it's always better to have more, but I don't understand why this is such a difficult concept for people to accept. If we're not talking about Darnold getting $40 million or $45 million, realistically, what are we talking about here? Probably $20 million a year at most, and that doesn't close the door. Even with it, you still have the advantage. Part of the reason it doesn't feel like it's such a bad burden is because the other contract would be so light, right? Because it's a rookie contract, and people are talking about it like, well, you got nothing left if you give that kind of money. You've basically eliminated the advantage that you allegedly have with McCarthy on a rookie deal.
Yes. To that, I would say I wrote about 1,000 words in my newsletter today about the last decade or so of the finances for the Vikings at the quarterback position. So, yes, I am aware that J.J. McCarthy is on a rookie contract. I also think that this front office and this head coach have been fairly consistent about saying we want to be careful about how we bring quarterbacks along. And you've heard Kevin O'Connell talk about teams ruining quarterbacks. And one of the things that I think they want to do is make sure he is ready to go. And if that is week 1 in 2025, great. Because if you send Sam Darnold to a deal that's $20 million a year and there's a market for him, guess what? That contract is still tradable going forward. So I don't think it's something that would completely rule out them doing a lot of other things, especially when there are plenty of ways to make it so that you can put cash in players' pockets without having it be something that kills your cap. The void years have been there. I wrote about a little bit of that today as well. I think they're going to continue to use those things going forward to lower the cap hits. Rob Brzezinski obviously does this as well as anybody in the NFL. So I think if they were to sign Darnold, there are plenty of ways to still do a lot of what they want to do. I mean, if Darnold's number for this year was $20 million, I don't even know if it'll be that high from a cap perspective, but let's say it is, they'll still have $40 million plus to play with, which is more than they've had in quite a long time. And I think they'll still be able to make a lot of things happen with that. And then the other piece of it is that if you get to a point in, say it's May, where you're like, hey, McCarthy's ready, and we are going to move forward with him, or even before that, you can trade that contract to somebody else. It gives you enough leverage to have an asset that helps you in your draft capital in the years to come. It's more important this year to have draft picks, yes, but if you have somebody that could bring you a high, day 1, day 2 draft pick, probably day 2 in the future for Darnold, I think that's still something that is worthwhile. So there are a lot of ways this can go. I just don't think it's as binary of a discussion as it turns into sometimes on social media. And I get it. Everybody's excited about the rookie, and people are badly wanting the young quarterback that can kind of open the door for this franchise. I get that. It's a big deal. Fans are right to want that. This team has not had it in a very, very, very long time. So all of that is valid, and I think that's still the hope long term. But the reality of the injury and the fact that he's still 22 years old, the Vikings do have to think about what if this doesn't play exactly the way we're hoping for 2025. So I think a lot of this is rooted in that type of an aim, is just having ways to go about it, given the situation with McCarthy.
Have a fine weekend. We will chat next week. Thank you, Ben.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Dan.
Ben Goessling, Star Tribune and StarTribune.com, brought to you by Standard Heating and Air. Lavelle will file a live report from spring training. Might actually be between venues, between spring training cities, when he joins us in the car, which means it could be an adventuresome visit, as it often is with Lavelle. We do have, between 5 and 5:30, a couple of texts to respond to, not to mention some breaking news regarding some new medical information on the Gene Hackman story that has gotten, or will be getting, a lot of attention as well. Top 5 will include what?
I'm a little distracted. I must not fly enough, because I'm just looking at a tweet where a woman on a Southwest plane in Houston.
Yeah.
Did you talk about this yesterday?
Didn't talk about it. I saw the video actually last night. Yeah, she decided to prance up and down the aisle naked
for 25 minutes.
Yeah,
before action was taken.
Well, what do you want them to do? What do you want people to do to her?
I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know what the grievance was. So top 5, on the other hand,
yes,
will include Wolves, Wild, and a state hockey update. The finals are set for AA. Big semifinal matchups coming later tonight right here on The Fan.